Good to see everyone this morning. Hate to interrupt conversations. Those are always good and important, but glad to see everybody today. Oh, there he is.
I had to go get you some coffee.
Uh-huh. Hey, the only thing left was decaf, I think. So.
It is. Yeah. Aren't you glad? I'm wired enough. I don't need to be any more wired. All right, why don't you kind of lead us up to where we've gotten?
All right, we're in Genesis.
Yes, we're in Genesis. We've been working through Genesis 1. And some of y'all are thinking, when in the world are y'all going to get through chapter 1? Hopefully today.
Yeah, we're shooting for that.
We are. We're shooting for that today. Remember, the question you have to ask is this question. What were the questions Israelite slaves are asking that Moses is answering? Don't assume Moses is writing to us. He's writing for us, but not to us. And so he's answering questions that are over 3,000 years old. And those questions are radically different than our questions are. And so you got to answer the right questions.
Yeah, when you approach it from the idea of trying to answer everything from a scientific perspective, you're just approaching it in the wrong way. And it leaves, honestly, when you approach it that way, at least for me, it leaves you, I think it makes it to a case of where you feel more, I think I would come across as more defensive than what it needs to be at all. Because again, we've got to look at the questions that are being asked. What did Israel need to know? Like, who is God? I mean, who is this?
Yeah.
We're used to all these various gods in Egypt and all, and yet now there's one. Who is the one God, and what's he doing, and how does all this work? Those are the things that they're trying to get answers for.
And here's the conclusion you've got to accept. This becomes a challenge. God did not attempt to correct the understanding of the science of the Israelite slaves at that time. In other words, God didn't run them through biology and chemistry and astrology and geology. God didn't attempt to correct their scientific understanding. Otherwise, the book of Genesis would have been big.
Yeah.
And so God accepts them where they are. Let me go back to a very simple illustration. Your 3-year-old comes up to you and says to you, "Mama, where do babies come from?" 3-year-old. Now, you've got one of two decisions. You can attempt to teach your 3-year-old science. And if you want to attempt to do that, all I can say to you is God bless your soul. Or you can say what most of us said was, babies come from hospitals. Okay? Now you go, well, that's not true. It did. Both of my boys came from the hospital when I brought them home. I mean, now I understand, but a 3-year-old cannot understand human biology. And to try to teach the 3-year-old, by the way, I'm not even sure a first grader or a third grader. I mean, it takes
a 61-year-old.
Or a 61-year-old. I'm actually 63, but Lee, I appreciate that. Yes. So God did not try to correct their scientific language. And so he spoke in language that would communicate with them. Otherwise, they would have kind of looked at us going, what? What's he talking about? How that the earth orbits the sun? And no, instead he says, by the way, he put 2 lamps up in the sky. A lamp to give you light in the day and a lesser lamp to give you... That word that's used there, light, is the same word used with the menorah that they put inside the tabernacle. He put a light inside the tabernacle. He wasn't trying to teach us about the revolution of the sun and the solar system. That wasn't what's going on. Ask the right questions, you get the right answer. And then once again, real quick, Lee, if you don't mind.
Yeah, just the parallels that we've got. You've got on the left the idea of the space. Day 1, light. Day 2, the waters. Day 3, the seas are parted. And then their functions. They're parallel. They go together. Let there be lights. The creation of the sun, the moon, stars. The waters below are populated with marine life. Atmosphere above is populated with flying creatures and birds. And then day 6, they just mirror one another to an extent. Maybe mirror isn't quite the right word, but they go hand in hand together, which helps to me, it gives a much greater understanding of creation itself. Yeah. Because if we're thinking 6 days of creation, if you're only thinking of things being created, well, what did he really create?
Yeah.
On day 1, day 2, what was made there? Well, it wasn't so much things that were made, but things were being prepared.
Yeah. And so again, picture it as a house. On days 1, 2, and 3, he fixes the rooms. You have the living room, you have the kitchen, you have the dining room. And then days 4, 5, and 6, what does he put in the kitchen? He puts the stove, refrigerator. What does he put in the living room? He puts the television, the chair. What does he put in the dining room? He puts the kitchen table and the chairs. In other words, you create space in the first 3 days, and you fill that space in the next 3 days. And so once you see that, by the way, you can remember what was created on the 3 days. Most of the time, when you say to a Christian, name me the 6 days of creation. What did God create each day? We get day 1, and then it gets a little fuzzy. This is a beautiful pneumatic way, remembrance way of remembering space created first, and then what went in that space. So we're now looking at the animals. This is verse 21. So God created the great creature of the sea. We talked about that briefly last week. We were kind of ending with that. And every living thing in the waters and all that teems according to their kinds, every winged bird according to its time. And God saw that it was good. He saw it was functional. He saw it did what it was supposed to do. It's useful. Now let me go back once again to this phrase, the great sea creatures. Some translations will translate that whales. Some will say monsters, sea creatures. This uses the word creatures. Very likely what's going on here is a counter-paganism, fake God. In other words, if you go back to the Old Testament, you have creatures like Leviathan or Rahab. Rahab is this creature you find in the Old Testament. And these are not real creatures. They're creatures in people's imagination that inhabited the waters. And basically what you have, like you said a while ago, God taking what they already believe and saying, by the way, these are not monsters. These are not these horrible creatures. These are things God created to frolic in the water.
Yeah.
He is controlling them. They are not controlling him. And then we get an interesting one here. So walk us through with this command that God gave to the birds and to the fish.
Yeah, God blessed them, said, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the water in the seas, let the birds increase on the earth. It's interesting how it's phrased that way. The whole, fill the water in the seas. Okay, what do we?
Yeah.
What exactly are we filling? What are the animals supposed to be filling? But just continue to increase in number, become greater and greater in number. And to me, a part of that is just preparing for future.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to need lots of animals and creatures for the future, for food, for all sorts of things. And so God's saying, hey, you need to be fruitful. And I know sometimes it kind of sounds funny. You mean he was talking to a bird and saying, hey, you go and be fruitful.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what he was saying exactly as far as how he was doing it, but obviously he's telling the creatures, produce, be available. You're going to need to be needed. So.
And let me come back to what I presented in the lesson this morning. God made us rulers over creation. We're the ones that rule over this world. Now, we rule over it horribly now because we're fallen. And what you see happening is us destroying God's creatures. We as humanity right now are destroying that which God created. And we need to be aware of that. This idea that we can go out and kill all the rhinos, well, rhinos are not important. If they weren't important, God wouldn't have created them. We can go kill all the birds. We can go and fish all the fish out of the sea. We need to be responsible creatures of God. Ecology should be one of the biggest subjects that Christians support. I mean, I'm one of these persons, people tell me all the time, but Les, you believe that the world's going to be burned up with fire at the end of time. I do. But in the meantime, we don't know when Jesus is coming back. Do we really want to leave to our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids? God could wait another 2,000 years. Are we going to leave to them a world that's been destroyed because we could not control our appetites? We need to think about that. By the way, I'm a big ecologist. If you're one of these people that, I hate tree huggers. Well, I hate that because I'm a tree hugger. I do. I love trees. I love plants. I love animals. One of my favorite programs on television is, who's the zoo guy from Columbus Zoo, June? Hanna. What's his first name? Jack Hanna.
Oh, Jack Hanna.
Jack Hanna, had this Saturday morning program for many, many years. He's now got Alzheimer's, and so he's not able to function there. But here was a man who loved God's creation and wanted to protect it, and that I appreciate.
You watch Crikey, It's the Irwins now?
Cry against what?
Crikey, It's the Irwins.
I've seen that, yeah. I remember, him when he was killed, absolutely. Again, someone who cared. All right, now the land.
Yeah, so let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds. Livestock creatures that move along the ground, the wild animals, basically everything that's living on the earth.
Now, by the way, this is day 6. We've now moved into the last day.
Yeah, and so again, they're going to get the same, command. Be fruitful. Increase in number. And again, you stop and think about the things that God created. He said they were good, useful. And I know there's times we may stop and think, what exactly are some of these things that were created? What were they created for other than to sting me? Or, to bite me or, whatever. I think Joan's, one of her questions she's going to have for God is, what was the point of making spiders and mosquitoes and things like that. What was the point? But that everything has a purpose, and I think that's one of the keys that we find not only in recognizing what God's done, but going back to your other point of taking care of them. Yeah. If we're not taking care of them, what are we saying to God? I mean, what am I saying to God if I don't care about the things that He's created?
And watch in particular here what He creates. He creates the land animals, but notice especially the ones that are useful for mankind. Most of the time we don't notice this. Look at the language once again. Let the land produce living creatures according to their kind, the livestock. The Hebrew word there, li, means cattle, domesticated animals, sheep, goats, cattle, camels. That's created from the beginning, which is a quite fascinating concept. Again, what are the Israelites asking? Here's what they're asking. We need light. God said, I'm going to give you light. And by the way, the light's going to be a time for you. You'll have daytime, you'll have nighttime. Okay? Then God says, okay, I want to create space for the birds and the fish. So God creates the space for the birds and the fish. Then God says, okay, I want to create the actual things, the actual things that give light. And so God creates the sun, the moon, the stars. Now, notice, not God's. That's the biggest thing we looked at last week. God didn't create Ra. He didn't create Khonsu, the god of the moon for the Egyptians. Things that the Israelites would have all believed in. No, these are lamps that God created in the sky. And then God creates the livestock. He creates the animals that they need to live on. And so and it's odd because I don't think most of us think about when we get over to Genesis chapter 4, Cain and Abel are born, and Abel right off the bat is a keeper of livestock.
Yeah.
Cain's a farmer. How did he tame all these sheep and goats? No, God created them domesticated to begin with.
Yeah. It's again, it just goes back to me, the tremendous planning God puts into this. I mean, it wasn't haphazard. It was, ultimately I'm creating mankind in my image, and I'm going to do everything I can to try to I am doing everything that he needs, and I'm going to put it in his hands. Unfortunately, what do we do with it at times is another issue altogether. But
and remember, for the Israelites, God's in control. Their God, the one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he's given them light, he's given them time, he's given them seasons, he's given them holy days, he's given them water, he's given them food. Every need they have, this God supplies, which in the ancient world was a big question. Again, we live in a world that's been blessed so much. I don't know the last time you thought, where am I going to get water at today? We don't even ask that question. They had to ask that question. Or where am I going to get food today? And by the way, I don't know about you, Lee, but man, God gives me so much food in my yard if I would just take advantage of it. I've got a squirrel that's stealing every one of my tomatoes. And I'm pretty sure God is saying June needs to cook some squirrel stew. But I can't convince her to shoot it, skin it, clean it, and cook it. So if any of y'all want to help her with that, I'd appreciate it. God supplies us with what we need.
exactly.
And so going back the other direction, God made the wild animals, God creator of wild animals, and the livestock and all the other creatures. And like you said, it's good.
Yeah.
Does what it's supposed to. All right, now we come to the fun part. Walk us through this text.
Oh, yeah. So let us make mankind in our image, us.
Reflect on that a little bit. When he says, God says, let us.
Yeah, immediately, it takes us back to, the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, and the fact, that it reminds us of John 1. In the beginning, the Word was the Word, which is Jesus. The Word was with God. The Word was God. Nothing's created without
Jesus.
the Word.
Yeah.
And so, again, can we completely wrap our mind around the whole, three aspects as one? I can't. I know people try, but it does remind us the fact that it's us, it's God the Father, the Son, the Spirit. They're all involved in the creation process. So they rule, and they're going to rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky. Basically, we're supposed to be in charge.
Exactly.
And that's a huge responsibility to take that on. We may come across that again here in another slide or two along the way.
Notice that language there, image. Let us make mankind in our image. One of the biggest debated subjects in theology. How are we created in the image of God? And of course, I know people come up in all kinds of different directions, what that image means. I have some weird views on that one, as I'm sure.
Shocking.
Absolutely
yes,
shocking. Yes, thank you. I tend to be that way on that one. A lot of people see God almost like a cloud, a nebulous spirit. I don't see God that way. I see God as having a spiritual body. I know good theologians who look at me and go, you are nuts. I get it. I understand that. But when the Bible talks about God's eyes, God's ears, God's hands, I think it's being literal. I don't think it's anthropomorphic. A lot of people think it does, and I understand there's no way I can prove my position, no way they can prove their position. God is spirit, but we know that angels had bodies.
Right.
I mean, these angels would appear and could actually appear in numerous different ways.
Not to look at the face of God.
We see that, and you do in Revelation 22, finally see the face of God. Now, how do you see the face of God if there's no face of God? And so again, when I see image, I really do think of image, that God has hands. God, and you go, well, why would God need feet? I don't know. I don't have answers to all those questions. But still, I think there's something about that. But it goes much further than just appearance.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's the whole, the whole idea, aspect of, consciousness, and recognizing that there is, unfortunately, ultimately, Adam and Eve figure out the whole aspect of right and wrong.
And so not just consciousness, but moral consciousness.
But moral consciousness. I mean, all those things come into play when we're talking about it.
Yeah. So God creates mankind as his image bearers. Now, it's important that you see this concept. Let's go back to the 10 Commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. Number 1. No other gods before me. Now, of course, you're thinking, but Moses, there is but one God. You can't have any other gods if there are no other gods. Moses is writing in their worldview. Okay? Does Moses believe in the one and only God? Yes. But does he realize that the Egyptians have gods, the Canaanites have gods, the Moabites have gods? I mean, all of them have got their gods that they worship. And so Moses begins, don't put one of these other gods in front of you.
Because they were also, in leaving Egypt,
they're bringing their gods
They're bringing their gods with them. So.
Absolutely. And some of them are still evidently holding on to the gods that Abraham's family had on the other side in Babylon. And so you get a world full of these concepts of gods that we look at and go, Ra wasn't a real God. That was the sun God created. Yes, we understand that. That was a different worldview than they had. They believed that the sun was a God just as real as it could have been at that time. So, no other gods before me. The second one, which is fascinating, is this one. You shall not make unto yourself an image of God. No idols. And Lee, I love to tell people that the reason God didn't want us, and by the way, when we do that, we don't do a real good job.
Right.
Aaron comes along and depicts God as what? As a cow or a calf. Now, if a kid came out, did any children, when you were in ministry, did any of them come out and give you pictures that they had drawn of you while you were teaching a class or preaching?
Yes, we burned those quickly.
You burned those quickly. Yeah, anytime you get those, you would look at them and go, oh, that's me. And they go, yeah.
That's how you see me.
Yes, that's how you see me. And so you get those. By the way, I saved some of them because they're so funny. But y'all, think about God. When God's sitting there looking at his children, and Aaron says, and of course, Aaron, you remember what he told Moses.
Well, I just threw that gold in there, and this calf came popping out of the fire.
Yeah, it was a miracle.
It was the most amazing thing.
Yes, I took the gold, threw it in, and out came a calf. Yeah, right. I mean, by the way, if someone said, hey, I painted a picture of you, and hands you a picture of a skunk, I mean, what would you think? Oh, that's me. Yeah, that's the way I see you.
Or the way they smell you.
Or the way they smell. And to think God looking at that golden calf and going, really? Mm-hmm. Because here's the thing. God's already created his image. Look in the mirror. Me and you are the image of God. Now, are we cursed? Yes. The shine is not there.
Right.
But God didn't destroy the complete image when we sinned. We still reflect the image of God. That's why when I go to prison out at River Bend, I can come up with some of the worst criminals in the world. And let me tell you, I work with people that if you looked at the crimes they committed, you'd go, do you trust that individual? I don't know if I do or not. But I'm working with them, trying to bring out of them the image of God. Because it's still there no matter what they've committed or what they've done.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that in conversations I've had with people over the years, and people who either were Christians but then left or have never, accepted. And over and over I get to the point where we're talking and I say, well, you just don't know what I've done.
Yeah.
You know, if you knew what I'd done, you
Yep.
wouldn't waste your time with me or whatever. I was like, it doesn't matter what you've done. God knows what all of us have done, and all of us have got things that we don't want anybody else to know about. Uh, and the point is, you know, we've all sinned. We've all broken the law, and so God still wants you to be a part of His family.
All right, now we're going to wade into a little bit tougher thing here in a moment. First, notice again, rule, what you mentioned a minute ago, Lee. You know, and walk us through this, because I know this is important for us to see.
Yeah. So God creates, you know, this vocation for mankind. First of all, the question is, how important and essential is it for you and I to have a vocation, to have a purpose? You know, we think about that within the work that we do. You know, you and I have worked in ministry for years and years and years. I had a change in vocation, which was challenging at the age that I was at that time, but I have a new vocation. It's not where I had envisioned being, but it's an important aspect of things that I do. But you know, we stop and think about our own lives. How important is it for us to have a reason, for us to have a purpose for living, for what we're doing? And even when folks retire, folks that retire and stop doing everything, don't last very long, typically. But folks who retire and who stay involved with other things, take on hobbies, get involved in new aspects of church work, perhaps, or voluntary work. I think you're planning on spending an hour or so in your garden, you know, once you retire. You know, I know you love gardening. I don't understand you, but I know you love it.
June doesn't either.
Yeah.
June doesn't either.
June, you and I are like, yeah, got it. Yeah.
Listen, I pick my beautiful flowers, take them into June, and she says, "Oh, that's nice."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "You don't like flowers?" She said, "I'd rather have chocolate." Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
But
There you go. To each their own.
Yeah. But you know, it's important to have this vocation. You know, we all recognize, even though there's times we complain about our vocation or our work, or if some of it's really challenging or hard, but we all recognize the importance of it and the purpose that it gives us in our lives. Well, God gave us the ultimate vocation, you know, that they may rule. I mean, we're overseeing His, you know, everything else that He's created. You know, we're to oversee it. And how badly have we misused and abused that very vocation? You know, we're talking about the extinction of animals or plant life, other things. I was looking this morning just briefly. You know, how many animals have become extinct? You know, over the last 100 years, and it just real quick, it gave me a list of 12. One of them was the passenger pigeon.
Yeah.
Passenger pigeon, you know, has been gone for a long time now, but you know, they were just you would
Billions
never,
of
yeah,
them.
you would never,
Billions of them.
never would have thought that, and at that time, people would never have thought that they're going to become extinct, but they did. They were hunted for food, certainly, but then there were others. Times people just shoot them and just shoot them and leave them. You know, just for the sport. We were very close. 80 years ago, very close to losing bison.
Yeah.
I mean, very
all.
close.
Yeah.
And again, people were just, you know, the Native Americans would use them for food. I mean, that's why they would kill them. But other times, people would just, you know, when people were traveling on trains back in, you know, in 1880s, 1870s, 1880s, they just take guns, just shoot, fire from the train, kill the bison, just keep going. You know, didn't mean anything to them. It's been estimated that by the year 2100, unless things change, unless we change the way we do things, that there will be another 500 species of animal that will become extinct by the year 2100. And you stop and you think about some of the ones that are very close to that. The rhinoceros,
Yeah.
The elephant, the hippopotamus. I mean, some of these unbelievable creatures, and yet because of a lack of care and concern, those animals are coming very close to perhaps not being here in the next few years.
And that's that last sentence. How badly has mankind misused and abused this vocation? By the way, when you think about Adam and Eve, and we'll get to Adam and Eve in this series, but when Adam and Eve are placed in the garden, what are they there to do? And of course, the text says they're there to care for it. I don't know how developed the Garden of Eden was. I know the rest of the world was not developed at all. And God's plan was always for us to develop it, subdue it. We'll look at it here in a moment. Bring something profitable out of it that is responsible in the way we do it. By the way, that is what we will do in the new heavens and new earth that I preached on this morning. When people say, what do you mean we'll rule? And the answer is we will do that which God gave us the ability to do from the get-go. By the way, most of us who work do not work in what God intended us to work in. God never intended for there to be ministers who preach funerals, who go to hospitals, who counsel with people. God never created us to do that. God didn't mean for us to have marriage problems, but we need a Brian Shepherd. God didn't mean for us to die, but we need funeral homes. I mean, police officers. God never intended there to be. There wasn't supposed to be police officers in the Garden of Eden. What's Adam going to do? Run a red light somewhere? Come on, give me a break. God intended us to do what you would have wanted to do if we didn't live in a fallen world. I tell people all the time, if you didn't have to work for food, it's on the trees you eat. If you didn't have to worry about clothing, you didn't wear any. If you didn't have to worry about problems, if you could do anything you wanted to do, aka the person that just won $1.28 billion, if you could do anything you wanted to do, and they will not be able to do that because of what they won, what would you do? Would you paint? Would you write music? Michael Jordan's already doing what he always was created to do. Have beautiful gardens. He's doing the original Adam and Eve thing. And Michael, I appreciate that. That's what Lee and June don't appreciate. I don't know why. You have to forgive them for that. But these beautiful, beautiful gardens that you just sit in and you look at, and not only do you go wow, but God goes wow. That's when God says, that is what I created you for. When someone creates a beautiful painting, God goes, that's what I... When a woman or a man cooks an incredible meal, God goes, that's what I created you for. God created us to be creative, and that's what he wants us to go back to. Again, the Psalm text that I threw on the screen this morning during the sermon, God put everything under our feet. Again, we were created and are responsible for the world we live in. And if you say, I can't clean up the pollution in the Cumberland River, then don't add to it. There's so much we can do. I preached several years ago on this subject, walked out the back of the church building. A brother came up and said, don't preach any more of that ecology garbage. I don't appreciate it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I want to continue to preach that we're caretakers of God's creation, and he will hold us accountable, not much less our kids and our grandkids. John Walton now moves into the area of creation itself, kind of the summary. He says, whereas in the rest of the ancient world, creation was set up to serve the gods. In other words, if you go and look at the creation myths of the Babylonians, creation myths of the Egyptians, the world was created to serve the gods. That's why it was created. Not so biblically, not for the Israelites. Instead, which by the way is a theocentric view, in Genesis, creation is not set up for the benefit of God. God doesn't need anything he created. He sets it up for the benefit of humanity. And so it's an anthropocentric view. In other words, Genesis 1 is about meeting our needs, not God's needs. He cares for us. And so you see that important thing. And so you have man ruling over creation. Then, boy, this is a tough one, Lee, in the world we live in today.
Yeah. It drives me insane at times when I think about it. God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. I mean, that's it. I mean, those are the options that we have, male and female. And yet, in our society today, we've seen, and sometimes it becomes a case of where science is an amazing blessing from God when used correctly. But when it's misused, it leads to horrible things and horrible situations. I came across an article a couple of days ago. It was someone who'd written a book, and she was complaining about the fact that her book had been banned by so many people or schools or whatever. Some of you may have heard of this, the book I Am Jazz. I don't know if you're familiar with that book or not.
I'm not.
But the person who wrote the book is writing it from someone who has changed their gender, for lack of a better way of putting it. And she says, it's just wrong that people are banning my book, because this is a book available for people to let them know that, hey, if you live like this, well, there's a place for you. Now, in no shape, form, or fashion does any of this mean that you don't love that person, because you do. But when we see the directions that people have taken things, and this particular person who wrote this book says in the article, I was born as a boy. At the age of 2, I recognized that I was really a girl. At the age of 2. At the age of 5, starting to take steps to make changes, starting out from a social perspective of transitioning to a woman. And that in and of itself, that's perfectly good reason to ban the book. But B, is so sad. I mean, I can't imagine. I don't understand what were the parents thinking? Encouraging at the age of 2, and we see within our society. Again, society wants everything to be accepted. Everything should be right. Kind of reminds me, the phrase that we hear in the Old Testament. Everyone did right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
They didn't really care. It wasn't really important about what God wanted, or it was just, I'm going to do what I want to do.
And let me just say something about this. Here's God creating gender, male, female. We shouldn't be shocked that the fall has corrupted every area of our lives. That should not shock us. We are in bondage to decay, Paul says in Romans chapter 8. I am, you are, we all are. And it's affected how we look at how God created us. You can get an American passport now, and you can put down on your gender male, female, or other. American government, again, trying to be all things to all people. I try to say to people, don't be shocked that we have been affected by the fall in every aspect of our life, including sexuality. And by the way, let me just speak as someone who, I'm heterosexual, okay? But what I want to say, though, is that sin has attacked that. I mean, that's why you have fornication. That's why you have adultery. That's why you have pornography. That's why you have sexual abuse. That's among heterosexuals. Sin has invaded every aspect of our lives. No one is immune. And that's why you counsel heterosexuals just like you might counsel someone who's struggling with homosexuality or transgenderism, things like that. We live in a world that instead of trying to say, how do we move back toward the way God created us? How do we think in a different way? And by the way, for me, is to think in that way as a heterosexual male, appropriately, wisely, correctly, and we all struggle with it. Everybody struggles with it. I mean, that's why sexuality is always listed among the first of the sins. And so we all need to step back and say, okay, how did God create us? How have I gotten off that path? And how do I get back on God's path? As opposed to saying, I'm simply going to take how I've been messed up by the decay of the world, and I'm going to simply live within what I feel like I have become. And of course, it creates just innumerable problems that we now see in America today.
Yeah, and throughout the entire world.
And throughout the entire world. If you're not keeping up with the big debates in sports, the big debate in sports is, what do you do with women who transition to men, men who transition to women, it goes that direction, who then want to compete in high school and college sports. And of course, what's happening is transgender women, in other words, they were born male, but they've transitioned, as they call it, again, science being used in a very unusual way, in order to then compete as females. And of course, what's happening is that in many cases, women who have, all of their life wanted to compete in sports are now being defeated in swimming, in track, by these transgender females. And the question is, okay, can you allow men who have transitioned to women to play in that sport? Jen and I were just talking about that yesterday, and it's fascinating that I don't know if you've noticed, but it doesn't work the reverse way. No. You've not had women who have transitioned to men who are competing in men's sports where that's an issue. And the reason is very simple. They can't compete. And we all know that God created us different. He created men different than women, and therefore that's why you don't see women playing in the NFL. Of course, come on, y'all. We need to live within the world. And so, again, let's be kind, gentle, caring, loving, and yet stand firmly on what the Bible teaches. And if somebody wants to come to me and talk to me and says, Leslie, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that, come on, let's talk.
I think one of the keys as well is younger generations are really
to them, that's the civil rights of this time period.
It's something that should be accepted, and if you don't accept, if you're not accepting, well, then you're automatically considered, biased or racist or whatever the term is, and standing up in a kind way for what God teaches is what we're called to do, and there was I know just this past week in North Carolina, I think it was a soccer team were wearing what they teamed their pride jerseys for a particular night. It was LGBTQ night, and there was one player who chose not to play because she doesn't believe that that's something that should be promoted. Yeah. She also didn't play for the national team in one game because of that. Yeah. And you get folks who immediately are like, well, that's a terrible thing. But as far as, well, that's terrible what she's doing or whatever. But she's taking a stand, and she's not being belligerent. she wasn't even trying to make a huge deal of it. She just, I'm just not going to play. But everybody else takes it and goes another direction with it. It's so sad to me that one of God's promises has been hijacked.
Yeah.
The rainbow.
Let me say all of God's promises.
Well, right,
yeah,
but yeah, that one comes into mind in particular.
Yeah. And let me finish up. And our time is up. But let me finish up with something that I want to be very clear about. I grew up in a time when people who struggled with sexual issues were truly treated in ungodly and disrespectful ways. I've heard preachers say things from pulpits that God will hold them accountable for because they were incredibly ugly and unkind. We need to take people where they are, no matter where they are. And with the love of Jesus Christ, try to lead them as we are being led to where we need to be. As Lee said a few moments ago, if I as a preacher got up here and belittled every sin that every person committed, I would eventually belittle every one of us, including myself. I mean, if I want to be ugly, I can be incredibly ugly and just isolate and focus on the sin you may struggle with. In other words, the beam that's in your eye, just like I've got a beam in mine. And so my exhortation to us as the church is speak with kind words, always. Do not make jokes, do not belittle, do not smart off. Treat people where they are with respect and dignity. Listen, I go into a prison where people have committed some of the most horrible crimes imaginable to humanity, and my first response is to treat them as a human being. Some people like to call them inmates. I simply call them people. When my inmate, if I can use that term, as some people do, was coming up for parole, he said, "I guess you know why I'm in prison." And I looked at him and I said, "I don't have a clue." And he said, "What do you mean you don't have a clue? You've been coming out here for 4 years now and you don't know why I'm in prison?" I said, "No, I didn't want to know why you were here. I just wanted to get to know who you are." And I love him as a brother. And doesn't excuse what he did any more than I'm excused from what I've done in my life. But I treated him with respect and with love, and I expect one of these days to sit down across from a dinner table with him and to treat him as a brother in Christ. That's the way we need to approach all people, friends. So let's be careful in this debate. We have to be careful to make sure we don't stand when we need to stand. Boy,
Sure.
Lee, you're exactly right. We need to take a position, and if it means I'm not playing in tonight's game, stand for that position. And at the same time, though, you don't call other people names. You don't show disrespect. You sure don't treat them in an unkind way that would cause them to turn away from Jesus. Balancing act, always a balancing act.
And don't always get it right.
You won't always get it right. I haven't in my past, and probably will not always in my future as well. But I will strive, as I hope we all will, for that. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for our lesson today. Thank you for the way you created us. Help us to stand for your truth. And at the same time, Father, as we seek to bring others into it, to be kind, loving, and caring for those who, Father, the fall has caused all of us to move in directions we need to return to you on. Help us as we try to do that. Bless us with this week with a great week, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.